Welcome to the NucleusNL channel. Today I'm gonna show you how to make this sort of a post-apocalyptic multi-layered distressed paint effect on your metal parts. Keep in mind that this is supposed to be just that, a layered paint effect, like you would find on some industrial applications. Despite the color palette chosen here, which led some people to believe this is supposed to be some sort of a cheap rust effect, this has nothing to do with the rust whatsoever. I have a separate video about rust, so if I do rust, I do it properly. So this is supposed to be a layered paint effect, which has its applications. Now, I've took a carabiner because I like carabiners and you can attach them to all sorts of gear, but you can also use this technique on any sort of a metal part. So this right here is a sample piece of aluminum, which I've sandpapered before that. It doesn't have to be sandpapered, but I just had this one at hand. And this is a standard carabiner I got for a couple of euros from the construction store, completely untouched. You could also wire brush it or sandpaper it, but it's not necessary. So the first thing I'm doing is spraying it with some black paint. Nothing too fancy to that. And it looks sprayed like this. You notice that I'm not totally drowning it in paint. This will apply for all the layers I'm gonna make, because in the end I want to show some metal shining through as well, so why drown it? So here I'm using my garden rake to hold this carabiner in the air. And you can see right there that it's already rubbing off at some points. So right now I don't want it to rub off that much just yet. So I'm gonna set it down and fix the damage just for now. And then I let it all dry for a bit, 5 to 10 minutes. So here is how the plate looks. A nice layer of paint. After this, after you let the paint dry, you just rub it on the floor with some sand on the floor. Doesn't have to be the floor, obviously, just some hard surface with some abrasive. So concrete floor plus sand works for me. You could use sandpaper, you could use whatever. Just to rub it off. So right here you see that I've removed a bit too much paint. That happens. That will probably happen to you, especially if you don't let it dry for long enough. And you see the paint right here is so flaky. It's so wet still. I can rub it off with my fingers, which is cool. It saves me a lot of work, actually, because I don't have to rub as much and press as hard. But it doesn't look great yet, so I'm applying the third layer, which is this yellow paint. And the important thing about those paints is, if you're using acrylic, then stick to acrylic. If you're using alkyd-based paints, use alkyd-based paints for all of your layers. So just use paints of the same type for all of your layers. It doesn't play such a huge role what type of paint you're using for this particular effect. It just plays a role that they are the same type. That said, I didn't check if they were the same type, because usually it just works regardless. But it's better to use paints of the same type, because those connect to each other nicely and don't cause problems. So after each layer I'm just rubbing off some of the paint on that floor covered by sand. And this gives me a cool random effect, but it doesn't have to be completely random, or it has to be not just completely random. I'll get back to that in a sec. So right now I'm applying the final layer, which is a really diffuse layer of black paint, to make it just look more dirty and add a bit of depth to it. So while applying this to my sample aluminum plate, I see that I'm really not happy with how it looks. I've just rubbed off too much of the red paint. So what I'm gonna do is just bluntly reapply that layer on top of everything that's already there. Remember, we're trying to create a chaotic effect, so some chaos is okay in this case. So I let it dry for a bit, really not long, as you see. I rub it really gently, like if the paint is still wet, you don't need to apply a lot of pressure. So let it dry for just a bit, get a feeling for it, and then just rub it gently. And now I'm applying some spotty yellow paint again. Again, I'm not drowning the whole thing in paint, I'm applying it in a spotty way, which already sort of simulates wear and tear, or at least one of its aspects. I'm letting the aluminum plate dry a bit, really just a bit, and then I'm again gently rubbing it against the floor. It's a rinse and repeat process, like with the most distressing processes. So right now I'm applying what I call the final layer of distressing. So after applying all of the layers, you need to simulate the fact that the edges of the thing would be rubbing against stuff repeatedly. So that's why this edge down there is shiny and chrome, and it's important. It's generally a good idea for any sort of a distressing process to apply more wear and tear to those parts of the part, of the item you're making, of the prop you're designing, of your costume, to those parts which would get more wear and tear naturally by use. So right now I'm flaking off some paint with my fingers in the area where the rope would be on that carabiner, and thus where a lot of wear and tear would be. Now you can't unfortunately see it on camera, but there is some small font embedded in the carabiner, so I'm spraying some black paint and then I'm rubbing it off with my fingers, which results in the black paint remaining inside of the letters. So that gives it an additional cool effect, emphasizing that font. So here it is, folks. It's a really simple and fun to use technique, and it can help a lot with your detail work. So remember, this episode and every other episode of the Nuclear Snell channel is brought to you by my supporters on Patreon. Especially if you're a regular viewer, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It's not expensive for you, but it helps me a ton in creating new content for you and your friends and your tribe. So, I will see you in the next episode. Have fun crafting, post whatever you craft to my Facebook page, and until then, hail the snail.